And welcome back. As we're going to get ready to make our next game, we're going to first talk about a thing called the UI canvas before we actually go ahead and start working in this environment. So what is the UI canvas? Well, there's a couple of things we need to know. First off, what is a UI? Well, UI is just a term that's short for user interface. This refers to text, buttons, sliders, etc. Anything that pretty much the person playing your game is going to see is going to be an element of the user interface, apart from maybe like sprites and stuff like that. Now, UI elements exist, or sometimes referred to as living, upon the game canvas. And what is a canvas? Well, a canvas is simply just this space, if you will, that exists. It's within the screen space of your game, and it's often treated very separately from necessarily your game world. And the cool thing about canvases is that we can actually have multiple canvases be applied or used within a game. Now, if we actually want to look at how to do that, let's go ahead and get ready to create our next game. So just like before, we're going to choose a 2D core, and we're going to go ahead and call this one Quizmaster to go ahead and get us started. And just like before, one thing I want to point out, don't forget to go down to your project settings, and if you haven't, make sure you don't create your game inside of another game. Make sure that your project setting folder is, of course, adjusted to show. All right, and so what you want to do is, once your game is loaded and ready to start working with, we're going to go ahead and bring in our resources here. So I have a couple resources for us to go ahead and use, and let's go ahead and do that by creating a folder here. So we're going to actually kind of go back a little bit here, and let's go call this our sprites. And we're going to then import into the sprites folder everything that's inside of this other folder. Is that this folder is zipped, so don't forget that you need to right click on it and extract that in order to get those files out of there, because otherwise you try to put it into the sprites folder and you're going to run into issues. But once you have that, all you need to do is we're going to go ahead and grab those resources. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab these right here. So these are already extracted for me. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy those into this sprites folder here. So just like we've done previously, and once it loads those up, you'll have those there. And then we can actually begin. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to actually add my first canvas event. So I'm going to come over here in my hierarchy, and let's just right click UI, and we'll do canvas. And you'll see when I add that in there, you can see it also adds an event system, and that is pretty cool that it adds that in there, because it says, hey, you're going to probably want this. In fact, we're going to need this. So we're actually just going to leave this event system that gets added alone for now. But let's take a second look at our canvas, because I want to point out a few things here. If we look over here in our inspector, the first thing you notice is we don't have just a regular transform. Instead, we have a rect transform, which means we have a couple more values and things that we're going to have to deal with. For example, we can see we have anchors in here that we didn't have before, and we have other values that we can kind of play around with. Now, you notice they are grayed out right now, because that's something that if you look, it says they're driven by canvas. Okay, cool. So we're not going to worry about this transformation right now. But I do also want to show that there are a couple other things in here. So we have, for example, our render mode, our scaler, raycaster. These are all values for us just to know that they exist. We're not going to do anything with them yet, but I want you to know that they're here, because this is, again, an element that we're going to need to get familiar. Now I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the scene view here, because we talked about the scene view, and we talked about how with the canvas it operates kind of its own space. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate this, I'm going to actually right click on canvas, and let's go ahead and create a 2D object here. Actually, let's do a UI, and let's do just a blank image here. And you can see in my game view, you'll see I now have this kind of white square here. It's a blank image that's kind of here that we don't have anything readily rendered to it. But if you look here, I don't see that here in my game view. Why don't I see it in my game view, even though it's clearly here within the game? Well, that's because there's two different things we're having to work with here. This square that we are looking at right now is where the camera is kind of operating. So this is of course, our scene space. If I go ahead and just double click over here on canvas and zoom out, you'll see that we now have this giant area right here with that corresponding square. Whereas like you can see this smaller space down here, well, that's my camera down here, right? So these are operating two different things, and this big space, of course, is where this scene is actually working. So this is where it's actually all the magic, if you want to think about it that way, is happening, is here in this screen space right here. Whereas like the camera, again, is down here. So even though the main camera is right here and looking at this, there's a little bit of things going on behind the scenes that it says, hey, even though I have this small rectangle to look at right here, where I actually want you pointing is up here, at the canvas. And so that's why we're seeing this rectangle here, even though it doesn't necessarily show up. Now let's go ahead and look at our image here, because what we want to do is take this image. Right now it's just a placeholder, but we want to effectively have it fill our entire canvas here, because we're going to use this really effectively as our background here. And so I'm just going to go to my image here, and you can see right now I have my handles. And one of the cool things you'll see is I can, of course, start stretching this and manipulating this, and you can see how it changes our position values, but it also can change our width and height. So that's pretty cool there. So I'm just going to go ahead though and just reset those. There we go. One of the things I want to point out though is we have, of course, in the middle here, this almost we're looking kind of crosshair thing, and that's what is called our pivot point here. And of course we have anchors and stuff in here, and we can play around with these different values. We can key them in, or we can actually click here on this symbol that's right here, and we can of course start setting different values. So for example, if I want to take this point here and move it up to the corner here, so for example I want to move it up to the corner here, I can do that and very easily do that. If I were to set these back to 0, 0, you can see that it's now centered much more at 0, 0, which is pretty cool. Now if I want to set the pivot point, which is effectively again that center there, you can see if I hold down shift, you'll see I also get the option to set the pivot point. So I want to maybe set that pivot point to be the center there, or maybe I want to set the position, which is where we're having this thing be. So if it says hold down the Alt key, you'll see we also get that option, and we can now snap this in here to this corner, which is pretty cool. So that's a nice way to get a nice good snap to the corner of my canvas without having to try to manually adjust everything and try to make sure I got all the values correctly, again, because it's all automatically. Now if I want to fill this image, I could of course grab my handle here and drag this across, or if you look here at my stretch here option, which is the very far end, you can see I have the option to stretch everything all the way out. And so I'm going to grab those keys again, so I'm going to press shift, I'm going to press Alt so I can make sure I get everything here, because I want to make sure this is going to fill the entire space, and I want to make sure it gets centered. I can then press the stretch here, and I want to stretch this all the way, and you can see that it's now filled this entire space. And one of the cool things you'll see is that pivot point, which was before locked here at that corner, has now been split to kind of for each of these corners. So you can see like a piece here, a piece here, a piece here, a piece here. The center, of course, is still here, which is pretty cool because that's our position. And we filled this entire canvas, which is going to make it real easy when we say, hey, I want to put an image in place here, because now I don't have to try and worry about resetting. Now, before we get going with this game too far, one thing I want to point out is our aspect ratio, because right now I'm set to 16:9, but I could very easily change it to a different aspect ratio. So I could make this a free aspect, which of course resizes it to different things, or I could make it, let's go ahead and do a full HD ratio, because that's what we're going to want to have this thing work with. Because again, for what our purposes are, this is going to be probably the most common ratio that most things get working with, is this 1080, so our full HD. And that's going to be a good starting point there, is that we can now jump off and actually start editing. So since we were going to have to work with different pieces here, what I want to do here first is, with this canvas that I've already kind of established, I'm going to go ahead and take this one and look at my mock-up screen as being part of that canvas. So I'm going to go to the image here, and I want to go ahead and fill in. So I'm just going to click and drag the mock-up screen here over to the source image for this sprite, and you'll see that it automatically fills in for me, which is pretty nice. Now, of course, this is not going to be our final screen, and so we're going to kind of use this as a pre-visualization, a way for us to kind of preview what do we want the elements of our game to look like. And so what I want to do is actually make this so that it's not necessarily up front and center. So I'm actually going to go to my color window here, and I'm actually going to take the alpha value here, which is controlling transparency, and I'm going to bring that down. You see, as I bring that down, it's going to kind of fade away. And so a good value for that might be, let's say, 0.25. So that'd be, we can still see it, but it's going to be kind of transparent a little bit, so we can work with things without being in the way. I'm also going to go ahead and rename where it says canvas. I want to rename that to maybe the pre-viz canvas, just so that way I know that this is my pre-visualization canvas, and that way I don't have to worry about that. Now, I do want to go ahead and add another canvas, because again, we want to separate and isolate things out into their different components here, but for my background. So go ahead, pause the video, see if you can go ahead and add that canvas on your own, and then let's do it together. All right, so let's go ahead and add that second canvas. So all I'm going to do is going to do the same process I did before. I'm going to do a UI element. I'm going to add a canvas, and this is now going to be my background canvas. So I'm just going to go ahead and label that as such. And then we want to do the same thing as we did before. So we're going to go ahead and add another image. So we're just going to right click on background canvas, and let's go ahead and add a UI. We're going to add an image, and I'm going to go to where my source image is and grab the background image and drag that into the source image there. You can see now we have the quiz background. Now you notice that it's not filling in this area here, so we need to look at our rect transform. So I'm going to go here, and let's go ahead and size that up. So we want to make sure this is kind of set to the center, and we're going to fill that up. Boom, there it is. That's a nice, good looking background there. Now, one thing you'll notice is that we don't see our previs at all. So I actually want to go into my previs canvas here a little bit and want to change the sort order. So I just want to make sure that it's nice and high. So I'm going to make this, let's say, 10, just so I can know that way it's going to be above this other canvas that I'm going to work with. So I can kind of still see it here as I start working on this. Now, if I ever want to hide this canvas, because let's say I'm done working with it as a template, I can just uncheck this box here and I can see my background perfectly easy, which makes it pretty nice for me to actually see, because this is what we're probably going to want in our final game. We're not going to want to see this other image. This is a representation. So, but this is a great start for our game, because next we can start actually start adding some of these other elements in here